本当に最初からその人の上でリフトをしている感覚ではなくて、はい、本当にまあ言ったらあれですけど、棚に乗ってるような感じ。それぐらいしっかりしてます。
棚という表現ですけれども。
滑る棚か。
滑る棚。笑ってらっしゃいますけど、滑る棚なりにすごく勉強したり、トレーニングしたりしてるんですよね、木原さんね。
そうですね。高級な棚になれるように日々努力してきました。
なんかすごく感動的なメッセージのビニール袋を持ちながらね、滑る棚って言われるのは、どんなお気持ちでいらっしゃいますか？
いや、もう最高の褒め言葉。
最高の褒め言葉。ありがとうございます。
In 2026, under the bright lights of Milan, a young Japanese skater stood at the top of the world. But who could have imagined that this same girl had once been a 16-year-old who was almost left without a partner, without direction, and without a place on the ice? This is the story of Riku Miura, a skater who was never treated like the obvious chosen one. A girl who had to face the painful truth that talent alone is not always enough when that talent is placed in the wrong battlefield. And this is how she broke through that cruel wall, found the one partner who could change everything, and turned a quiet moment of rejection into the beginning of Japan's first Olympic pairs gold medal dream. When I first came across this story, what moved me most was not the glitter of the gold medal or the world record that came later, but the loneliness of the beginning, because when you already know how the story ends, that forgotten summer of 2019 feels even more heartbreaking and even more beautiful. At that time, Riku Miura was only 16 years old, and the news came quietly through a short announcement from the Japan Skating Federation. Her first pair's partnership had ended. There was no dramatic headline, no major media storm, and no long explanation. For most of the public, it passed almost unnoticed. But for Miura, it was a life-changing moment. She had already competed at the World Junior Championships 3 years in a row, which was a rare achievement for a Japanese pairs skater. From the outside, it looked as if she was slowly building a future. But suddenly, the partner beside her was gone, and in pairs skating, losing a partner is not like changing a costume or changing music. It can mean losing the entire path forward. At 16, many athletes would have stopped there. Many would have waited for someone else to decide their future. But Miura did not wait, and that is where this story truly begins. To understand why this moment mattered so much, we have to go back further. Riku Miura was born in Takarazuka, Hyogo, and began skating when she was 5 years old. From the start, she had a rare kind of physical courage. She loved movement, speed, height, and the thrill of being lifted or thrown through the air. She also practiced karate and gymnastics, which gave her sharp balance, flexibility, and body control. People around her could already see that she had the natural qualities for pairs skating. She was small, flexible, fearless, and rhythmical. But like many young Japanese girls, her first dream was singles skating, and that was the problem. Japanese women's singles was one of the most competitive environments in the world. Around her were skaters like Kaori Sakamoto and Wakaba Higachi, athletes who would later rise to the global stage. The field was brutally deep. Even at domestic events, the level could feel like a world championship. Miura was talented. Her skating had softness, musicality, and flow. But in singles, the fight was dominated by jump difficulty and consistency. No matter how hard she trained, she began to feel that her best qualities were not being rewarded in the right way. That is one of the cruelest things in sports. Sometimes the problem is not a lack of talent. Sometimes the problem is that your talent belongs somewhere else. Then came the suggestion that changed everything. A coach told her, "Why don't you try pairs?" For a young skater, that meant letting go of the dream she had built for years. It meant starting again from zero. It meant learning lifts, throws, pair spins, and the dangerous art of trusting another person with your body in the air. At just 14 years old, Miura made that decision. She stepped away from singles and entered the world of pairs. That choice was not a retreat. It was an act of courage. For the next 4 years, she learned the foundation of pair skating with her first partner. She competed internationally, gained experience, and stood on the World Junior stage again and again. But even with progress, something was missing. Pair skating is not only about technique, it is about timing, chemistry, trust, and that invisible connection that makes two people look like one body moving across the ice. By 2019, the partnership had reached its limit, and then it ended. But this is where Miura changed from a girl waiting to be chosen into a skater who chose her own destiny. Almost immediately after the split, she went to a pairs tryout in Nagoya. She did not wait for someone to rescue her. She did not wait for fate to knock on her door. She walked toward it herself, and at that same tryout was Ryuichi Kihara. Kihara was also standing at a painful crossroads. Injuries had pushed him close to retirement. He had struggled with back and shoulder problems, and at one point he was even working at a skate rental counter while wondering whether his competitive life was ending. He had not arrived there as a guaranteed future champion. He was simply helping because Japan needed male pairs skaters. In other words, both of them came to that rink carrying disappointment. Neither one looked like the obvious answer. But then came the moment that changed Japanese figure skating forever. A coach suggested that they try skating together. Kihara lifted Miura, and in that instant the atmosphere on the ice changed. The lift was high. The balance was calm. The timing felt natural. For two skaters who had barely known each other, it looked almost impossible. People watching later described it as if they were seeing a top international pair. Miura felt something even stronger. In that short moment in the air, she knew, this is the one. It was not a childish feeling. It was not simple emotion. It was the judgment of a skater who had spent years being lifted, thrown, caught, and tested. Her body knew the difference between uncertainty and safety. Her experience recognized something her mind could not ignore. That is what makes this moment so powerful. All the years that seemed painful, all the results that felt incomplete, all the frustration from singles, all the lessons from her first partnership, none of it was wasted. Every part of her past prepared her to recognize Ryuichi Kihara when he finally appeared. Sometimes destiny does not arrive as a miracle. Sometimes destiny arrives as the moment when all your past struggles suddenly make sense. What makes Miura's story so inspiring is not only that she found the right partner, it is that she refused to stay powerless after losing the first one. She did not let silence define her. She did not let a quiet announcement become the end of her story. She moved, that image of a 16-year-old girl walking into a tryout, not waiting to be selected, but searching for the person she believed in, is the emotional heart of this entire journey. Years later, when Miura and Kihara stood on the Olympic stage as champions, the world saw the gold medal. The world saw the record. The world saw the tears. But behind that shining ending was a much quieter beginning. A teenage girl lost her partner. A struggling male skater nearly lost his career. And in one lift, two unfinished stories became one destiny. That is why Riku Miura's rise is not only a sports success story. It is a reminder that sometimes the moment that feels like rejection is actually the moment life is redirecting you toward the place you were always meant to reach. That message reaches far beyond borders because it speaks to something every person can understand. It is not only about talent. It is not only about destiny. It is about choosing your own road when life tries to leave you behind. Even someone who knows nothing about figure skating can feel the weight of that question. If you lost everything in one moment, would you still have the courage to walk to the next door and knock? After Riku Miura and Ryuichi Kihara found each other, their connection became something deeper than a sports partnership. This story is beautiful because Miura was not the only person being saved. Kihara was also standing at the edge of heartbreak. Injuries had pushed him close to retirement, and he was working at a skate rental counter while wondering if his competitive career was already over. So this was not a story of one person rescuing the other. It was the story of two people who had both nearly lost their place on the ice, finding a way to save each other. When Miura felt, this is the only one, Kihara also found a reason to believe again. The fire inside him, which had almost disappeared, began to burn once more. Their trust was not built only during competitions. It was built in daily life. After their partnership began, Miura moved to Canada, far from her family, far from her friends, and far from everything familiar. In a foreign country where the language was different and the winter cold could feel unbearable, Kihara drove her to the rink again and again. Those ordinary drives, later affectionately remembered by fans, became part of the foundation of their bond. It may sound simple, but in a partnership like theirs, the small daily things matter. The rides to practice, the silence before training, the shared routine, the feeling that one person would always show up for the other. Those moments became the invisible strength behind everything the world later saw on the ice. That is why their connection feels so powerful. It was not built from glamour. It was built from two people who understood pain, loneliness, and starting over. And behind them were coaches who saw possibilities before the rest of the world did. One important turning point came when a coach looked at young Miura, who was struggling in singles, and told her, "Why don't you try pairs? Your body type, your rhythm, and especially your flexibility seem made for it." That one sentence changed the direction of her life. Later, at the 2019 tryout, another simple suggestion changed everything again. The coach told Miura and Kihara to try skating together. It was not a dramatic speech. It was not a grand prediction. It was just a quiet push. But that one moment opened the door to a world record and an Olympic gold medal. Sometimes life does not change because of a loud motivational speech. Sometimes it changes because one person sees something in you that you cannot see yet and says the right words at the right time. From there, the story grew larger than anyone could have imagined. Miura and Kihara would eventually set a world record with a total score of 233.5 points and win Japan's first Olympic gold medal in pairs skating at the Milano Cortina Olympics. That achievement was not just a personal victory. It changed the meaning of Japanese pairs skating. For many years, pairs skating had been dominated by powerhouse countries with long traditions in the discipline. Japan was known for singles skating, not pairs. So when Miura and Kihara reached the very top, they did more than win. They broke an old belief about what Japanese skating could be, and what makes it even more remarkable is that no one saw it coming in 2019. When Miura lost her first partner, the news barely made a sound. There were no huge headlines predicting greatness. There was no public expectation that this quiet split would someday lead to Olympic history. But numbers do not lie. A world record. An Olympic gold medal, a first in Japanese pairs history. Those facts alone tell us how extraordinary this journey became. Still, numbers cannot explain the human cost behind the triumph. After their breakthrough, the real trials began. At the 2022 Beijing Olympics, Miura and Kihara finished 7th, the best result ever for a Japanese pair at that time. It felt like proof that their dream was becoming real. But soon after that rise, another painful test arrived. In 2023, Kihara suffered a serious back injury, lumbar spondylolysis. For a pairs skater, the back is everything. Every lift, every throw, every landing, every moment of support depends on the strength of the body. The pressure placed on the back during jumps and lifts can be enormous, and for Kihara, the damage had reached a point where doctors told him to stop training. Suddenly, the pair disappeared from the ice. For Miura, this created a heartbreaking choice. She was still young, she was still improving, she could have searched for another partner, she could have tried to keep moving forward without him. From a purely practical point of view, that might have seemed reasonable, but Miura made a different choice. She said she would wait until Ryuichi came back. That decision shows the heart of who she is. Waiting may sound passive, but for an athlete, waiting can be one of the hardest things in the world. Your body has a limited prime. Your best years do not last forever. Every month matters, every missed competition matters. And there was no guarantee that Kihara would return the same way or return at all. But Miura did not simply sit still. She kept training, she kept skating, she kept preparing herself so that if Kihara came back, she would be ready to give him the best version of herself. That is not passive waiting, that is active faith. The feeling she had in 2019, when one lift told her this is the person, had become something stronger. It had become commitment. By then, skating with someone else may have been logical, but for Miura, it no longer had meaning. That is the part of the story that truly tightens the heart. A gifted athlete gave her precious time, not because it was safe, not because it was easy, but because she believed in one person. And maybe that is why their skating moved people so deeply. When they lifted, caught, and supported each other on the ice, it was not just technique, it was history, it was memory, it was every difficult day they had survived together. Pairs skating has always been a discipline where partnerships change, injuries happen, careers end, new teams are formed. That is part of the sport's reality. But Miura and Kihara's story stands out because when separation would have been understandable, they chose trust. When logic said move on, they chose to wait. When the future was unclear, they chose each other. And that choice became the emotional backbone of their rise. Because before the gold medal, before the world record, before the standing ovations, there was a young girl who refused to give up after losing her partner. There was an injured man who found a reason to return. There were quiet drives to the rink in Canada. There were lonely training days. There was fear, uncertainty, and patience. And through all of it, they kept moving toward the same dream. That is why their victory was never just about skating. It was about two people proving that sometimes the strongest partnerships are not born from perfect timing. They are born from broken moments, from second chances, and from the courage to believe in someone when there is no guarantee at all. That is why Miura's decision to wait stands out so strongly in the history of pairs skating. In this sport, partnerships can change for many reasons. Injuries, timing, chemistry, age, pressure, and career direction can all force skaters onto separate paths. Sometimes when one partner is seriously injured, the other skater searching for a new partner is seen as a natural choice. But Miura chose something different. She did not choose efficiency. She did not choose the safest path. She chose one person, and that choice became even more powerful because Kihara's injury was not a small setback. It was the kind of back injury that could threaten a skater's entire career. For a pairs skater, the lower back carries unbelievable pressure through lifts, throws, landings, and rotations. Coming back from that kind of injury at the highest level was already a huge challenge. Waiting for that comeback while putting her own career on hold made Miura's choice even more extraordinary. This was not one miracle. It was several miracles stacked on top of each other. Kihara had to recover. Miura had to keep believing. Their timing had to survive. Their connection had to stay alive. And after all of that, they returned not just to compete, but to break a world record. That is why this story belongs in history. We also have to remember the country they came from. Japan has produced some of the greatest singles skaters in the world, but pairs skating had long been a much smaller and more difficult field. The training environment, the number of available partners,